They say the Middle Ages were dark, but no one ever told you why. The darkness didn't always come from ignorance or war sometimes. It came from the smell. Imagine walking through a medieval city, not the clean and noble castles that history books like to show, but a tangle of narrow streets slick with mud, ash, and something you'd rather not identify. Wooden beams leaned so close above that you could reach out your window and shake hands with your neighbor. Beneath you, a suspicious stream of brown liquid crawled its way toward the market square. And in this world of filth and faith, taking a bath could be the most dangerous thing you did all year. In 14th century Europe, public bathhouses were suddenly seen as dens of death. The Black Plague had swept across the continent, killing millions, and terrified people started connecting dots that didn't belong together. They believed diseases were spread through invisible vapors rising from the body, that steam itself carried evil spirits straight into your lungs. So when the church looked at the bathhouse, they didn't see a place to wash away dirt, they saw a gateway to sin and sickness. Cities closed them. Priests preached against them. You think you'll smell less like a damp goat, they said. But the bathhouse is closed for plague. The irony, of course, is that the very thing that might have made life slightly cleaner was forbidden for the sake of holiness. People would rather stink than risk damnation. These bathhouses had once been social centers. Men and women bathed together, often nude, chatting about crops, kings, and gossip. There were musicians, candles, and laughter echoing against the stone. It was the medieval version of a spa, mixed with a tavern relaxation, conversation, and the occasional scandal. Naturally, the church hated it. Pleasure was suspicious, laughter was unholy. Nakedness, even in hot water, was an open invitation for the devil to drop by. So they declared washing your body a threat to your soul. What they didn't realize was that this new fear created an empire of odor. The medieval city became a symphony of sweat, smoke, and rotten leather, and its people lived convinced that piety smelled like manure. If hygiene was dangerous, fashion could be fatal. Europe's sumptuary laws, those strange rules about clothing, told you exactly what you were allowed to wear depending on your rank. Silk, only for the upper clergy. Velvet, reserved for nobility. Gold thread? Don't even think about it unless your family tree had its own castle. For a merchant's wife to wear pearls was as scandalous as a thief robbing the king himself. It wasn't about taste, it was about power. The rich needed to look rich so that everyone else remembered their place. The poor, meanwhile, had to remain visibly poor, or else society might start asking uncomfortable questions about why a baker's daughter looked like a duchess. Imagine being dragged to prison because your cloak looked too fancy for your station that was real life. It sounds ridiculous now, but these rules kept economies from collapsing. Imported silk and dyes cost fortunes. If everyone tried to dress like nobility, they'd bankrupt their families and disrupt the fragile trade system that kept medieval towns alive. It was fashion as social engineering. It was also theatre. A daily performance where your clothes told the world exactly how far you could dream. So while the laws seem cruel, they served a purpose, preventing a civilization built on hierarchy from turning into chaos dressed in brocade. When the sun disappeared behind the crooked rooftops, the town bell would ring a deep, echoing sound that told everyone the same thing: cover your fire and go to bed. The curfew was not a suggestion. The word itself, from the French couvre-feu, literally meant cover the fire. People believed that putting out flames after dark prevented accidents, but the truth ran deeper. The curfew was about control. At night, cities became wild. Thieves, drunkards, and desperate souls wandered the streets. Darkness hid sins the church couldn't see, so the easiest solution was to extinguish the night altogether. When the bell tolled, you doused your hearth, gathered your children, and climbed into bed beside your family, your servants, your livestock, whoever shared your single smoky room. The fire went out, and with it went freedom. The medieval night was not a time for dreams. It was a curfew, enforced silence, where obedience was safer than curiosity. And if obedience failed, justice awaited divine, theatrical, and sometimes fatal. The medieval trial was less about evidence and more about spectacle. If you were accused of theft, witchcraft, or blasphemy, you might face the ordeal. The idea was simple. God would reveal the truth. Hold a red-hot iron. If your hand healed cleanly in 3 days, you were innocent. Be thrown into a river. If you sank, you were pure of heart but unfortunately dead. If you floated, you were guilty and would soon be burned for it. Madness, yes, but not without logic. In a world without science, where literacy was rare and bribery common, these rituals gave people faith that justice came from above, not from men. The flames and the water were symbols of divine intervention, God as judge, jury, and executioner. And if the accused died, well, it was assumed the Almighty wanted it that way. The church didn't stop at the courtroom. It reached into your weekends too. Sunday laws banned work, music, even games. You could be fined for baking bread on the Sabbath or publicly scolded for dancing. The intention was noble. Preserve the Lord's Day for worship. But peasants, exhausted from 6 days of labour, only wanted to live for a few hours. They'd sneak to the fields with a jug of ale, sing songs, or flirt by the river. To the clergy, that joy looked like rebellion. Pleasure, they warned, led to idleness, idleness to lust, lust to hellfire. So the Sabbath became the medieval version of a moral quarantine, silence enforced by sermons. Even joy had to be rationed. For those who made things, life revolved around the guild's powerful brotherhoods of craftsmen that guarded their trades like sacred mysteries. If you were a blacksmith, a baker, or a tailor, the guild owned you. Every recipe, every tool, every trick of your craft was a secret you swore to keep. Breaking that oath could cost you your livelihood, or worse, your safety. Guilds decided who could open shops, where they could sell, and how much they could charge. Freedom was a myth, but fairness, in their own strange way, was preserved. The system kept quality high and beggars few. In a world without consumer protection laws or quality checks, this was medieval regulation, strict, secretive, and surprisingly efficient. It was control disguised as brotherhood. So many of these rules sound absurd today: bans on bathing, fashion by decree, bells that told you when to sleep. But when you strip away the centuries of progress, you find that these people were not fools. They were survivors. Fear guided every decision. Fear of fire in wooden towns, fear of disease in unclean water, fear of chaos without authority, and above all, fear of angering God in a world that believed heaven watched every move. They built order out of terror, and for nearly 1,000 years, it worked well enough to hold civilization together. Perhaps that's the strangest lesson of all. Those weird medieval laws, the curfews, the clothing bans, the holy restrictions, were not madness, but methods of survival. They were the fragile rules of a frightened species, trying to stay alive in a world they didn't yet understand. The bells stopped ringing long ago, and the bathhouses reopened. Soap replaced sermons, and science took the place of superstition. Yet, if you listen closely on a quiet night, when the city falls still and the streetlights flicker, you can almost hear that distant bell, whispering across time, reminding us that fear once ruled the world, and that even in our modern age, we're not so far from those who feared the dark. And so ends the first tale of a world that reeked of goats and incense, of cities wrapped in smoke and prayers. But the story of the old world does not end here. Beyond the warm taverns and crowded towns lay a frozen frontier where courage froze harder than steel, and men with axes and faith tried to build paradise on ice. The next chapter belongs to them, to the Vikings of Greenland, who dared to live at the edge of the world. They called it Greenland, a name far too generous for what it truly was. To the first Vikings who saw its jagged coastline rising out of the fog, it must have looked like the end of the earth itself, a place of wind and silence, where the sea hissed against cliffs of black stone and mountains wore crowns of ice. Yet still, they came. Men and women from Iceland, led by a red-bearded outlaw named Eric, chasing exile, faith, and fortune across the frozen sea. They brought with them cattle, sheep, timber, iron, and hope, the kind of hope that only burns bright when the world you left behind no longer wants you. They didn't know it yet, but this new land would test the limits of human endurance. Eric the Red had been banished from Iceland for murder. In those days, that didn't make him a villain, just a man who'd lost a feud. Exile was the Viking version of a timeout that lasted 3 years. So, with nothing left to lose, Eric sailed west, beyond the known horizon, and stumbled upon a land covered in ice. To lure settlers, He gave it the friendliest name he could think of: Greenland. The trick worked. Within a decade, hundreds followed. They built turf houses along the fjords, dug into the earth like moles to hide from the wind, and prayed their crops would grow before the frost returned. Summer lasted only a whisper, but they made the most of it, cutting hay, drying fish, salting meat, weaving wool, and sealing every door with hope. From a distance, their settlements looked like tiny patches of life, clinging to a dead world. Inside, they smelled of smoke, sweat, and animal fat. Candles made of whale oil flickered against walls lined with animal hides. Outside, the wind never stopped. It howled like something alive, tearing at roofs and freezing tears before they fell. The Vikings learned to live with it, just as they learned to live with silence. No markets, no bells, no city noise, only the creak of ice and the lowing of cattle. In this silence, the faith they brought from Europe took root in strange soil. They built wooden churches with spires that pointed defiantly toward heaven, as if daring God to notice them. On Sundays, they gathered in wool cloaks, singing hymns in a language the wind carried away before anyone could finish the Amen. At first, Greenland rewarded their courage. Seals were plentiful, pastures were green for a few short months, and ships came from Iceland bringing tools and wine. They traded walrus tusks, furs, and ivory with Europe, proof that even at the edge of the world, commerce still ruled civilization. The church soon arrived too, because where there are souls, there are tithes. Bishops came wearing fine robes, demanding silver crosses and carved altars. The settlers obliged, carving their faith into stone, grateful for something constant in a world of ice. But the weather was changing. The 12th century brought colder winters, shorter summers, and ice creeping farther south each year. Cattle starved, fields froze. The sea that had once carried trade ships now trapped them in drifting walls of white. Greenland's people began to vanish, one generation at a time. The young sailed back to Iceland or Norway, chasing warmth and stories of easier living. Those who stayed behind adapted. They ate more fish and less bread, replaced wooden furniture with bone, and learned to read the moods of the wind. Some said they turned to the old gods again, to Thor and Frey, whose warmth seemed more dependable than distant saints. The last ships from Norway stopped coming in the late 1300s. When contact was finally re-established centuries later, explorers found abandoned farms, collapsed churches, and graves hidden beneath snow. The colony was gone, swallowed by the silence it had once defied. Historians still argue why. Some blame climate change, others famine, disease, or Inuit raids. Maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was simply that courage has limits, and even Viking strength cannot outshout the wind forever. Yet, in that failure lies something hauntingly human. The people of Greenland weren't foolish, they were stubbornly alive. They built homes where no one should, prayed where no one heard, and smiled in the face of a world that didn't care. Their ruins whisper the same lesson as every medieval lore and superstition. People will do anything to bring order to chaos, even if it means lying to themselves. Calling a land of ice Greenland wasn't deception, it was faith disguised as marketing. Some stories say a few survived longer than history remembers. Isolated families holding on in secret valleys, waiting for ships that never came. Their cows grew smaller each generation, their children paler, their words slower. They must have watched the ice creep closer, year by year, until the sea froze solid and even the sky seemed too heavy to hold. When their fires finally went out, no one was left to notice. The world moved on. But somewhere under that ice lies the echo of a wooden door creaking open, a woman stepping out to look at the horizon one last time, wondering if summer will ever come again. The Vikings' Greenland was not a tale of conquest or glory. It was a prayer whispered into a storm. It reminds us that history's heroes weren't always kings and knights. Sometimes they were farmers with frostbitten hands, milking half-starved cows, and believing that courage could keep the cold away. It couldn't. But for nearly 500 years it almost did. And when you stand before a map today and see the white void of Greenland stretching across the Arctic, remember that once people called it home. They laughed there, they sang, they told stories of warmth while the wind clawed at their doors. They called it Greenland not because it was true, but because they needed it to be. The ice would take them, but not their idea that even at the edge of the world, humanity would build a fire and pretend it was enough. And now, as our story drifts eastward, we leave the silence of the north behind. The next fires to warm us will not be Viking hearths, but wedding torches, flames lit by ancient hands in a land of music, perfume, and ritual. Our next stop lies far from ice and exile, in the world of the Yrian, a people who believed that love was not found, but forged, through ceremony, sacrifice, and song. In the ancient land of the Yrian people, love was not something you stumbled upon. It was something carefully constructed, like a fortress of silk, incense, and obligation. The Yrian did not marry for romance, they married for survival, for honor, for the invisible threads that bound families, wealth, and destiny together. To love freely was dangerous. To marry wisely was sacred. Their weddings were less about two hearts joining, and more about two lineages cautiously shaking hands under the watchful eyes of their gods. A Yrian wedding began long before the ceremony itself, sometimes years earlier, when two families decided that their bloodlines would serve each other well. The father of the groom would visit the father of the bride, not with flowers, but with contracts. Sheep, spices, land, and silver were negotiated like chess pieces. The bride's worth was measured not in beauty, but in what her union could protect: a border, an inheritance, a fragile peace. Sometimes the bride was 12. Sometimes she had never seen the man she would call husband until the morning he arrived with an entourage of musicians and priests. To modern ears, it sounds cruel, but to the Yrian, it was order. Marriage was the foundation upon which their world stood. A good match could end wars, a bad one could ruin generations. And behind every smiling bride stood a mother whispering old prayers into her ear, prayers about patience, fertility, and silence. On the morning of the ceremony, the bride was painted with oils and wrapped in layers of colored fabric, each layer symbolizing something she was expected to bring to her new home: loyalty, humility, endurance. The final veil was translucent gold, meant to blur her features just enough so the groom could imagine perfection. Her hair was soaked in myrrh, her hands decorated with thin silver rings that chimed softly when she moved, as if her body itself had become an instrument of fate. The procession moved slowly, through streets lined with neighbors, servants, and elders. At the front walked the musicians, playing long flutes that produced a sound between joy and lament. Behind them, the priest carried a bowl of burning herbs to purify the air, though everyone knew it was mostly to mask the smell of nervous sweat and livestock. The bride and groom met under an arch of flowers and bones, beauty and mortality intertwined, a reminder that even the happiest day in a Yrian life began with a whisper of death. The vows were not about love, they were about duty. The priest spoke first, calling upon the ancestors to witness the exchange. Then the couple touched hands over a bowl of wine mixed with salt and blood. They drank from it together, sealing the pact not just between two people, but between two houses. The crowd would cheer, throw petals, and chant blessings, though behind every cheer was calculation: who gained, who lost, and who would inherit next. When the feast began, it was a festival of excess. Tables overflowed with roasted lamb, figs, honeyed bread, and wine so thick it clung to the cup. Musicians played until their fingers blistered. Dancers moved like fire, their veils swirling in the smoke of torches. Every guest was expected to eat and drink until their body protested. Gluttony on a wedding night was not sin. It was gratitude made visible. The bride and groom, however, were expected to eat sparingly, to show restraint, for theirs was not a union of the flesh yet, but of spirit and contract. And then came the ritual that made outsiders whisper: the breaking of the veil. In a private chamber lit by a single flame, the groom would remove his bride's golden veil and see her face fully for the first time. If he found her pleasing, he would place the veil upon the flame and let it burn, a symbol that he accepted her as his equal. If not, he would fold it neatly and leave it beside the fire, meaning he would honor the marriage in name, but not in heart. Divorce did not exist, but distance did. Some veils were never burned. Some burned so brightly that the whole house smelled of ashes for days. The Yrian did not believe in romantic love, yet their songs were filled with it. Poets wrote of forbidden affection, of lovers who defied contracts and fled into the desert. These stories always ended in tragedy, as if to remind the people that love was beautiful precisely because it was doomed. To love freely was to challenge the gods, and the gods were not known for their mercy. Still, not every marriage was cold. There are letters, carved into clay tablets found centuries later, written by husbands who spoke tenderly to wives they barely knew at first. "Your hands are like water," one wrote, "and I am the stone you smooth." Another wrote, "You were chosen for me, but now I would choose you, even if the world ended." The Yrian might not have invented love, but in their quiet way, they discovered it not as rebellion, but as endurance. Marriage among them was also about fertility, and fertility was treated with the seriousness of war. After the wedding, the couple would spend 3 nights in seclusion. On the first, they shared stories. On the second, prayers. On the third, the bed. Outside, elders waited, listening for omens: the crackle of fire, the cry of wind, the hoot of an owl. Each sound meant something. A gentle breeze was good fortune. A sudden storm meant the ancestors disapproved. If no sounds came at all, that was worst of all. Silence meant uncertainty, and uncertainty bred fear. Months later, when the first signs of pregnancy appeared, the wife was celebrated not with flowers, but with offerings to the goddess of earth and milk. Every child was a treaty renewed, a bridge between past and future. The Yrian saw motherhood as sacred labor, not of choice, but of destiny. When a child was born, they whispered blessings of long life and obedience into its ear. No one wished for happiness. Happiness was too fragile a thing to ask of the gods. To modern minds, it might all seem cruel, a world of duty without freedom, of marriages without choice. But beneath the structure lay something deeply human, the yearning to belong, to make sense of life through ritual. The Yrian did not believe that people could control fate, so they built ceremonies to give the illusion of control. Every rule, every tradition, was a way to keep chaos at bay. Their weddings were not about love's beginning, but about civilization's survival. As centuries passed, the Yrian's songs faded, their temples crumbled, and their language disappeared into dust. But echoes of their customs lingered in other lands: the exchange of rings, the feasting, the idea that a wedding is both joy and contract. Even now, when a bride walks down the aisle to music and the scent of flowers, she carries a fragment of the Yrian with her. The details are lost, but the rhythm remains. The world would change, but the idea of love as duty would live on, pass through kings and queens, priests and soldiers, until it reached a man whose life embodied both love and war, a man whose destiny would close the chapter of the Viking Age forever. His name was Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, and his story was not about peace or marriage, but about the end of an era where courage still mattered more than survival. He was born into war, and he would die in it. Harald Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald Hardrada, meaning hard ruler, entered the world around the year 1015, in a Norway still bleeding from civil strife. His half-brother was Saint Olaf, the warrior king who fought to unite the land under one crown and one god. Harald was just 15 when he followed Olaf into battle, his sword almost as long as his own body. They fought at Stiklestad, where thunder rolled like drums and steel clashed in a rainstorm of blood. Olaf fell that day, cut down by his own countrymen. Harald was wounded, his armor shattered, his youth burned away. But he did not die. He crawled from the field and into legend. He fled east, across the frozen forests of Sweden, and into the realm of the Rus, the Viking-descended princes who ruled from the rivers of Kiev. There, among mercenaries and merchants, he grew into something more than a fugitive. His height was said to be that of 2 men, his hair golden, his voice quiet but heavy, like a blade resting on a table. He became a soldier of fortune, fighting for silver, for survival, and perhaps for revenge. He learned languages, diplomacy, the art of command. And when that was not enough, he went farther still south to Constantinople, the shining capital of the Byzantine Empire, where the world's riches met behind golden walls. In Constantinople, Harald joined the Varangian Guard, the emperor's elite unit of northern warriors. They were not bound by blood or land, only by oath. For nearly a decade, Harald fought under the banner of the Byzantine Eagle. He defended palaces, quelled uprisings, and led campaigns in Sicily, Jerusalem, and Asia Minor. His sword earned him wealth beyond measure: gold, jewels, silks, and slaves, but also something rarer, the patience to wait for destiny. He was a Viking in the heart of an empire, a wolf among marble pillars, and the empire both feared and admired him. They say he fell in love with a Byzantine princess, Maria, niece of the emperor himself. Some say she loved him too. But a man of the north could never sit beside the throne of the world. The story ends, as most such stories do, with longing, not fulfillment. When Harald returned to Norway, he carried not only gold, but the weight of every unspoken goodbye. He had left as a boy running from defeat. He returned as a man determined never to taste it again. Norway, though, was not waiting with open arms. Two kings ruled it already, Magnus the Good and Sweyn of Denmark. Harald had to buy his throne not with money, but with loyalty. He offered Magnus half his fortune in exchange for half the kingdom. For a time, the uneasy peace held. Then Magnus died suddenly, and Harald Hardrada ruled alone. His reign was stern, efficient, and often cruel. He taxed heavily, built ships obsessively, and punished rebellion without mercy. His people both feared and respected him. He was not a king of smiles, but of silence and iron. The sagas say he slept with one eye open and prayed like a man preparing for battle even in his dreams. He wanted more than Norway. The Viking hunger in him still burned. He turned his gaze toward Denmark first, waging years of raids and skirmishes, burning coastal towns and claiming tribute. He never managed to hold it, but he learned a lesson: that the world was changing. The Viking age of plunder was dying. Trade, diplomacy, and the church were the new weapons of power. Yet Harald, for all his wisdom, could not stop being what he was: a man born of storm and blood. In 1066 he heard of another opportunity: the English throne. The old king, Edward the Confessor, had died without an heir. Harald claimed that years before, Edward had promised him the crown, or at least that's what he told his men. Maybe it was ambition, maybe madness. He gathered his army, ships gleaming with dragon heads, sails full of northern wind, and crossed the North Sea. His warriors sang as they rowed, their voices rising like thunder over the waves. They were old by then, many of them veterans of 50 battles, but their faith in Harald was unshaken. To them, he was the last true Viking, the last man who still believed that glory was worth dying for. They landed in northern England and quickly crushed the local forces. Victory came easy, too easy. The air was warm, the fields green, the enemy scattered. Harald laughed and sang at the riverbank, his armor off, his tunic loose, his men resting beside piles of captured banners. It was September 25th when fate caught up to him. King Harold Godwinson of England, fast, cunning, relentless, had marched north in secret with his army and fell upon the Norsemen at Stamford Bridge. The sun was high, the day bright, and the English came like a wave of steel. The Vikings were caught unarmed, their armor left on ships a mile away. Harald had two choices: retreat or fight. He chose, as he always had, with defiance. He rode to the front, his blue cloak whipping in the wind, his great sword gleaming. He shouted to his men, "Let us fight for honor! Let us die before we run!" And they believed him. They formed their shield wall, a wall of wood and iron against the tide of England. For hours they held. The bridge turned red with blood. An anonymous Viking, they say, stood alone on the bridge, holding back the English army long enough for the others to regroup. Arrows darkened the sky. Axes rang like bells. Then, in the chaos, a single arrow found the space between Harald's armor and his throat. It pierced through. He fell without a sound, his sword still in hand. When his men saw their king fall, they fought harder not to win, but to die beside him. By evening, the field was silent, except for the crows. The English won that day, but only 3 weeks later, they themselves would fall to William the Conqueror at Hastings. History turned the page quickly, as it always does. But that arrow, that fall, marked the true end of an age. With Harald Hardrada died the last breath of the Viking world, a world of raids, sagas, and restless seas. After him, the north grew quiet. The swords rusted, the ships became trade vessels. And the people who once believed that courage alone could bend fate began to build churches instead of longships. Harald's body was later returned to Norway. They say he was buried in Trondheim, beneath a great stone, facing the sea he had loved so fiercely. His saga lived on in song of the boy who fled a battlefield, became a mercenary in empires, returned a king, and died chasing one last impossible dream. His enemies called him arrogant, his people called him the hard ruler. But history remembers him as something else, the last Viking, standing alone on a bridge between worlds, one foot in the age of myth, the other in the dawn of reason. And as the centuries passed, the laws, fears and rituals of the medieval world, from bathhouse bans to blood oaths, began to fade into memory. The darkness of superstition gave way to the faint light of understanding. Yet, the echo of those times remains. Every law written today, every ritual still performed, carries a shadow of that past, a whisper from those who tried, in their strange and fearful way, to bring order to chaos. The Middle Ages were never truly dark. They were just human, confused, hopeful, terrified, and endlessly inventive. From the peasants who obeyed the curfew bell, to the Vikings who defied the frozen sea, to the lovers bound by duty under the eyes of forgotten gods, they were all trying to survive the same thing we still face today: the uncertainty of being alive. And if you close your eyes tonight and listen carefully, beneath the hum of the modern world, you might still hear it, the faint toll of the curfew bell, the clash of swords at Stamford Bridge, the soft whisper of a Yrian bride's veil as it burns in the flame. History never really sleeps. It only dreams. The dream of history drifts slowly, like smoke over the ruins of time. Long after Harald Hardrada's body turned to dust, the world he left behind began to twist into something new, something fragile, uncertain, and almost self-aware. The medieval age was fading, but it didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, like the echo of a church bell, fading only when the world was ready to stop listening. The great castles still stood, but their stones began to crack. The old laws still ruled, but people whispered questions they weren't supposed to ask. And through those whispers, the first breaths of modern life began to stir. But before that awakening came fully, the Middle Ages spent their last centuries looking inward, clinging to the rules that had once made sense, now beginning to rot under the weight of time. The peasants still bowed to their lords, though the lords were more interested in gold than God. The church still thundered about sin, though its cathedrals glittered with wealth that had little to do with heaven. Markets grew larger, merchants bolder, and somewhere between fear and ambition, the world began to remember curiosity. In those years, Europe was a continent suspended between light and dark, a place where faith still burned, but reason was beginning to whisper. A monk might spend his life copying holy texts, yet doodle human faces in the margins. A farmer might curse the plague as God's punishment, yet notice that rats seem to bring it. A stonemason might carve gargoyles to ward off demons, yet secretly wonder if demons existed at all. The people didn't know it, but they were building a bridge, one that stretched from superstition to science, from myth to memory. Still, the old fears refused to die quietly. When plague returned, it came with new intensity, as if punishing humanity for its growing arrogance. The Black Death swept through once more in waves, not as a divine warning, but as biology's reminder that nature still ruled. And again, towns closed bathhouses, burned herbs in the streets, and prayed to saints whose names they barely remembered. But even then, something had changed. People began to observe. They noticed patterns. They drew crude maps of infection. They argued, quietly at first, that maybe the cause was not sin, but something invisible and natural. Fear remained, but it was no longer blind. The same transformation reached the laws that once dictated what you could wear, eat, or think. The sumptuary codes, those absurd fashion laws, began to crack as merchants rose in power. A man could now become rich through trade rather than birth, and wealth demanded recognition. Silks crossed the sea. Jewels glittered on the fingers of men whose fathers had shoveled mud. Nobles scoffed, but soon found themselves borrowing money from the very merchants they mocked. The hierarchy that had ruled for centuries began to tilt, and with it, the idea that destiny was fixed. Art began to change too. Painters stopped filling every corner with angels and saints and started looking at faces, real faces, flawed and alive. Writers started to laugh again, to mock their own kings, to tell stories where peasants had thoughts worth hearing. Even the idea of love, once buried under duty and fear, began to rise. The old Yrian spirit of arranged unions softened into something gentler. Poets wrote of choice, of desire, of the heart as something sacred in its own right. Love, they said, is no longer a contract but a conversation. The church frowned, of course, but the words had already escaped the parchment. Across the north, where Harald's descendants still ruled in their cold stone halls, the Viking blood still stirred not in war, but in exploration. The same restless urge that had sent men west to Greenland now drove them farther, into seas no map could contain. Their ships grew larger, their sails stronger, and their fear smaller. It was as if the ghosts of the old warriors refused to rest until the horizon itself was conquered. The world was stretching again, and for the first time, people were not just surviving it, but seeking it. And yet, beneath this quiet progress, the medieval soul still hummed. The church still owned the calendar, the land, the rhythm of life. The bells still tolled at dawn and dusk, summoning prayers and curfews. The scent of incense still filled the air. But there was something new in those prayers now: doubt. Small, trembling, and dangerous. A doubt that asked, what if? What if lightning wasn't wrath? What if disease wasn't judgment? What if heaven could wait until tomorrow, and today was worth living for its own sake? The scholars of that age would later be called heretics, but in truth, they were dreamers, men and women who loved God, but wanted to understand him better. They measured stars, sketched anatomy, counted the days between eclipses, and wrote quietly about what they saw. One monk, looking through a piece of polished glass, whispered that he could see details on the moon's surface. Another wrote that maybe the earth itself moved. For centuries, such thoughts would have meant fire and execution. Now, they meant the beginning of everything. When the Middle Ages finally began to crumble, it wasn't from war or disaster. It was from exhaustion. The world had spent 1,000 years clutching its fears, and its arms grew tired. Humanity was ready to exhale. The great cathedrals, built to intimidate, now inspired awe instead. The same laws that once controlled now fascinated. The absurdity of it all became beautiful, a reminder that even in ignorance, people had reached for meaning. And perhaps that is the quiet truth of history. Every strange rule, every cruel belief, every superstition was, at its heart, an attempt to make sense of chaos. They didn't have microscopes, or telescopes, or reasoned democracy, but they had imagination. They had courage enough to invent order where there was none. The bathhouse bans, the trials by fire, the curfews, the veils, the vows, and the Viking kings, all of them were songs in the same key: survival. Today, we laugh at them. We call them backward, barbaric, blind. Yet, look closely, and we're not so different. We still build laws to feel safe, still trade freedom for the illusion of control. We still believe in invisible forces, only now we call them markets, algorithms, or destiny. The Middle Ages never truly ended. They simply changed their clothes. So, if you find yourself awake at night, thinking about those centuries of superstition and smoke, don't imagine them as strangers. Imagine them as reflections humanity's earlier version, stumbling through darkness with candles instead of flashlights. They were us, without the comfort of knowing what we know. They were terrified and curious and brave in the quietest ways. And as you drift towards sleep, picture a world lit by torches and moonlight. The streets are silent, except for the echo of a curfew bell. A peasant pulls his blanket close. A merchant hides his silk. A Viking stares at the frozen horizon, and a Yrian bride lets her veil burn to ash. The world keeps spinning. The centuries fall away. And still, somewhere deep in time's unbroken dream, the Middle Ages breathe, not dark, not foolish, but profoundly human, waiting to be remembered not as monsters in shadow, but as ancestors who, in their own strange way, taught us how to survive the night. And yet, as dawn came to that long medieval night, something extraordinary began to happen. The world, once bound by superstition and soot, began to wake up slowly, hesitantly, like a farmer stirring before sunrise. The bells still tolled for prayer. The priest still preached of heaven and hell. But beneath those familiar sounds, a quieter rhythm emerged. It was the sound of thought. In Italian cities, merchants who had once cowered before bishops now financed painters, inventors, and poets. In dusty monasteries, monks who had once feared knowledge began to preserve it, copying not just scripture, but ancient Greek philosophy, Arabic science, and Roman poetry. Every candle that had once guarded against demons now illuminated the pages of rediscovered wisdom. The long, strange age of faith had not ended it, had transformed. The Middle Ages were not dying. They were evolving into something radiant. But it didn't happen with the snap of a finger or the stroke of a brush. It came through the slow rebellion of questions. A blacksmith asked why iron bent the way it did. A sailor asked why the stars changed their paths across the sky. A midwife asked why fevers came and went like tides. Small questions, dangerous questions, questions that would one day split the world open. Still, even in its final centuries, medieval Europe clung to contradiction. This was a time when the same man could pray in a cathedral and dissect a corpse in its basement. When kings funded crusades by day and alchemy by night. When scholars whispered of the earth moving around the sun but still crossed themselves before saying it aloud. It was a world balancing on the edge of faith and reason, afraid to fall, but destined to jump. The people who lived through those times never called themselves medieval. They didn't know they were waiting for the Renaissance. To them, life was just life, a mixture of misery and miracle, mud and incense. For every plague, there was music. For every sermon of fire and doom, there was laughter spilling from a tavern. For every tyrant who ruled by sword, there was a mother who sang her child to sleep, believing tomorrow might be kinder. That perhaps was the truest miracle of all. Not that the Middle Ages built cathedrals, but that they built hope. And hope, once planted, is stubborn. It crept into art, no longer just saints and angels, but ordinary faces, smiling, frowning, thinking. It bled into literature stories, not of miracles, but of misfits and dreamers. And it made its way into science, not grand discoveries yet, but small moments of clarity, like Galileo's eyes following the stars or Leonardo sketching the shape of a bird's wing. These men were the grandchildren of monks, the great-grandchildren of Vikings, the distant descendants of people who had once feared to bathe or laugh on Sundays. They were born from the same soil of superstition, they just dared to plant different seeds in it. The irony is that the people who feared the unknown the most gave birth to the ones who sought it. The medieval mind, so cautious, so reverent, so obedient, eventually grew tired of silence. Knowledge, once locked in Latin, began to slip into the languages of the people. Books spread faster than sermons. Truth, once dictated from pulpits, began to whisper from printed pages. It was no longer enough to believe. People wanted to understand. But if the Middle Ages gave us anything lasting, it was humility. Because for every leap forward, there was a memory of what came before, the laws, the fears, the strange logic that once held the world together. We laugh now at the thought of trials by fire and bans on baths. Yet deep down we know we still do the same thing in gentler ways. We build rules around our fears. We disguise uncertainty as order. We crave meaning even when we cannot see it. The medieval mind still lives in us, quietly, whispering that safety is worth more than truth. Perhaps that's why the Middle Ages remain so haunting. They were not simply a time before us, they were us, at our most raw. A world where survival depended not on what you knew, but what you believed. A world where every shadow might hold a demon, and every candle was a fragile act of defiance against the dark. If you close your eyes now, you can almost see it. The streets narrow and twist again. The air fills with the smoke of hearths and prayers. The curfew bell tolls in the distance. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammers in rhythm with a monk's chant. A merchant's wife hides her forbidden silk under a cloak of wool. A Viking ghost stares out over an icy fjord. A Yrian bride holds her breath as her veil burns. And above them all, the night sky wide, silent, endless. The same sky that looked down upon every age before and every age to come. They didn't know the names of the stars, but they knew enough to wonder. And maybe that's what mattered most. Not their answers, but their questions. Because history is not a ladder we climb, it's a circle we walk, over and over, each generation carrying a candle through the dark. lighting the same old fears in new shapes. The Middle Ages were just one long turn of that circle full of confusion, courage, and the quiet dignity of people doing their best with what little they understood. So as you drift toward sleep, remember them, the strange, stubborn souls who built the first fragile rules out of fear, who prayed for mercy yet dreamed of understanding, who carved their hopes into stone and stained glass and song. They were not perfect, they were not even right, but they were trying, always trying, to turn chaos into meaning. And in that endless effort to survive, to explain, to believe, they became something eternal. The bathhouses may be gone, the Viking ships long sunk, the Yrian temples reduced to dust, but their voices remain, echoing softly through time's corridors, reminding us that every rule, every myth, every mistake was a step toward who we are now. History never truly ends. It only sleeps, waiting for the next dreamer to wake it. And when history dreams, it dreams in echoes, echoes of footsteps across stone corridors, of prayers whispered into the chill of candlelit chapels, of the quiet weeping of a mother over a child lost to fever, of the hammering of distant blacksmiths shaping swords, plows, and destiny. The Middle Ages never truly died. They sank like embers beneath the ash of time, still warm, still glowing, waiting for the breath of memory to bring them alive again. If you listen closely, that breath is all around us. In the rules we follow without question, in the rituals we perform without understanding, in the small fears we justify with logic that feels older than reason. We are the inheritors of their anxieties and their awe. We still hang charms against bad luck, still believe in the power of symbols, a cross, a ring, a contract, a law. We pretend we are rational, modern creatures, but our hearts beat in medieval time. And maybe that's not a curse. Maybe that's what keeps us human. Because what the Middle Ages understood, what we often forget, is that the world is too vast, too uncertain, too uncontrollable to face without stories. Those strange medieval rules, those bands and bells, were not chains so much as lullabies, ways to calm a frightened civilization that barely understood itself. The bathhouse bands said, "You are safe if you stay clean in spirit." The fashion laws said, "You are safe if everyone knows their place." The trials by fire said, "God will not abandon the innocent." Each absurdity was a comfort, a reassurance in a world that had no guarantees. And even now, thousands of years later, we still tell ourselves the same things, only in different words. We follow routines, cling to patterns, build systems and schedules as if the universe is a ledger that can be balanced. We invent meaning where there may be none, because meaning is the only way to survive the chaos of existence. It's not foolishness. It's faith, the same kind, the medieval world carried like a torch through the dark. Yet there was something else that era gave us, something easy to overlook amid the superstition and smoke. It gave us humility. The sense that human knowledge, however grand, would always be smaller than the mysteries it sought to explain. The Middle Ages didn't divide the sacred from the mundane. They believed everything was connected. Every prayer was part of the weather, every law part of the stars. To live was to participate in something greater, even if you didn't understand it. It was a universe alive with meaning, and though much of that meaning was fear, it was also wonder. When you think of those people, peasants bent under the weight of grain, monks bending over manuscripts, sailors steering by the stars, lovers whispering beneath candlelight, remember that they were not walking backward through history. They were moving forward the only way they knew how, one uncertain step at a time. Their ignorance was not stupidity. It was courage, the courage to live without answers. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The very era we call dark was full of people reaching for light. They built cathedrals not because they understood God, but because they wanted to. They obeyed laws not because they loved authority, but because they feared chaos. They prayed not because they were naive, but because hope was the only rebellion they could afford. And in their reaching clumsy, faithful, desperate, they made beauty that still humbles us. The stained glass still glows, the songs still echo, the stone still stands. These were not the works of fools. They were the works of dreamers who built eternity one fearful day at a time. We are their children. Every law we write, every structure we build, every question we ask, is part of their inheritance. We are still trying to tame the same chaos with newer words, cleaner cities, brighter lights. But the truth hasn't changed. Beneath all our progress, we still crave meaning. We still build rituals. We still fear the dark. And maybe that's what makes this long, wandering story worth remembering. The Middle Ages were not a mistake in human history. They were a mirror. They show us what we are when the world stops making sense. Inventive, irrational, faithful, terrified, and endlessly hopeful. So, as the dream of history fades to its final whisper, imagine the last flicker of a medieval candle. The flame trembles but doesn't die. The walls around it are cold stone, but the light dances anyway. A monk turns the last page of his book. A peasant finishes his prayer. A Viking ship disappears into the fog. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolls once and falls silent. The night deepens. The past exhales. And in that silence, the same silence that has followed humanity for 1,000 years, we realize that the story was never about laws or kings or empires. It was about us. It was about the way we endure the dark, the way we invent reasons to keep going, the way we find faith in the flicker of a single flame. That is the legacy of the Middle Ages. Not darkness, but light surrounded by it. Not ignorance, but imagination dressed in fear. And as long as we remember them, as long as we keep our own small candles burning against the endless night, history will never truly sleep. It will dream. And in that dream, the world will always be waking. And so the dream continues, a dream made of ash and echoes, where the line between past and present dissolves like breath on glass. History never ends. It merely changes shape, retelling itself in new languages, new fears, new hopes. The Middle Ages slipped quietly into the Renaissance, but they didn't disappear. They hid beneath the marble statues and golden frescoes, whispering reminders that even beauty is born from struggle. The scholars who painted the dawn of modern thought still prayed before they wrote, still crossed themselves before they looked through a telescope, still trembled at the idea that maybe, just maybe, the earth was not the center of everything. The medieval mind had not vanished. It had simply learned to ask its questions in Latin. But the courage to ask them that was new. It was as if the world, having survived centuries of fear, had earned the right to be curious again. In Florence, a man named Dante wrote about a journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, not to glorify religion but to understand it. In Germany, a monk named Gutenberg tinkered with movable type and unknowingly created a revolution. Books that once took years to copy now multiplied like seeds scattered by the wind. Ideas that had been trapped in monasteries began to roam the world, bumping into one another, mating, mutating, sparking. But for every light that flickered to life, shadows followed. The same hunger for knowledge that freed Europe also fractured it. The church that had once united kingdoms began to splinter. New preachers shouted new truths, and wars of faith bled across the continent. The Reformation was not just a religious movement, it was a mirror shattering, each fragment reflecting a different version of God. And still, the people endured. Farmers still rose with the dawn, cobblers still bent over leather, children still played in the mud. Progress always looks faster in books than it does in life. To live in those centuries was to live between two worlds, one ending, one being born, and to belong fully to neither. By the 15th century, the old medieval certainties had thinned, but they still cast long shadows. The fear of witchcraft, for instance, bloomed not in the Dark Ages, but in the so-called Age of Reason. As knowledge expanded, so did paranoia. The same minds that mapped the stars also hunted women in the night, convinced that evil could be burned out of flesh. It was proof that progress and cruelty can share the same heartbeat, that enlightenment, too, can be afraid of the dark. Yet, amid the madness, there were miracles. Painters discovered perspective and taught the eye to see depth where there had been only symbol. Doctors began to wash their hands, though they didn't yet know why it worked. Architects learned to build domes that touched the sky, and musicians turned chants into harmonies that sounded almost like breathing. Humanity was learning not only to survive, but to express itself. The world was remembering how to feel. And in that rediscovery came a strange nostalgia, a longing for the faith that once comforted the medieval soul. For all its ignorance, the old world had offered a kind of certainty that the new one lacked. The medieval man woke each morning knowing exactly who he was, where he stood in the order of things, and what the stars meant. Now, with reason tearing through heaven's curtain, the universe suddenly seemed vast and empty. God was no longer a neighbor, but a concept, distant and quiet. The stars were not angels, they were fire. The earth was not the center, it was adrift. Freedom had arrived, but it was cold. It's easy to romanticize progress, to think of the Renaissance as an awakening from medieval sleep, but that's not how people felt then. To them, it was like stepping into a room where all the lights had been turned on at once. The glare was unbearable. The questions were endless. The comfort of mystery was gone, replaced by the loneliness of discovery. Still, they pressed forward. Because that's what humanity does, it trades comfort for truth, one age at a time. The same instinct that had once invented holy water now invented the compass. The same faith that had prayed for salvation now prayed for exploration. Ships sailed farther than any monk's imagination could reach. They crossed seas, met strangers, and brought back stories and plagues, and gold and guilt. The world was expanding, but so was its conscience. And perhaps that's why, centuries later, we still look back at the Middle Ages with both disdain and tenderness. We mock their ignorance, yet envy their certainty. We laugh at their fears, yet live by our own invisible laws, laws written not by kings or priests, but by our culture, our screens, our need to belong. We call ourselves free, but we still crave guidance. We still build idols, only now we call them systems. So maybe the Middle Ages never truly ended, maybe they just moved inside us. Every time we follow a rule we don't understand, every time we fear what we can't explain, every time we seek meaning in chaos, we are echoing the same heartbeat that pulsed beneath the stone floors of cathedrals 1,000 years ago. The world has changed, but the song has not. It hums beneath our progress, beneath our pride, beneath our lights. A reminder that beneath every science, there is still mystery. Beneath every logic, still longing. Beneath every map of the stars, still the question of why we are here at all. And that, perhaps, is the most medieval question of all, the question that never dies. Because history isn't a staircase, it's a spiral. We climb, and we fall, and we meet ourselves again in different clothes, with different tools, asking the same eternal things. And as long as we keep asking, the dream goes on endless, luminous, and faintly scented with smoke. The dream of those who lived before us, the ones who feared, obeyed, prayed, and built, still burns quietly in every human heart. We are their continuation, their proof, their voice carried forward through the ages. The curfew bells have fallen silent, but the echo remains, deep and low, inside us. And if you listen in the stillness of night, really listen, you might just hear it. The soft toll of time reminding you that you are part of the same story, still being written, still being dreamed. It begins faintly, a whisper, not a sound. The kind of silence that hums softly in your bones when the world grows still. Somewhere, beyond the reach of city lights and the noise of modern living, the pulse of the past keeps beating. It is not a memory exactly, but something deeper, an inheritance, a rhythm so ancient it feels like breathing. History has always been less a sequence of events and more a slow heartbeat of repetition. Fear, hope, discovery, collapse. The cycle turns endlessly, like seasons of the soul. And the Middle Ages, for all their distance, live inside that rhythm still. They exist in the way we look for order when chaos knocks, in the way we build stories to make sense of suffering, in the way we light small lamps against vast darkness and call it faith. The medieval world never wanted to be remembered for its rules or its wars. It wanted to be remembered for its endurance, for the way it survived itself. Centuries of plague, famine, ignorance and fire, yet the people kept building. Cathedrals rose from rubble, songs were carved into memory, and stories passed from voice to voice, long after their authors had turned to dust. Their greatest achievement was not progress, but persistence. They endured without certainty, and somehow, that was enough. And isn't that still what we do? We may not fear witches or plagues in the same way, but our ghosts have simply changed names. We fear losing purpose. We fear meaninglessness. We invent new systems to tell us who we are. Economies, algorithms, ideologies. Each one promises to order the world, to save us from the unknown. Each one eventually fails. Yet, like the peasants, priests, and kings before us, we begin again. The tools evolve, the heart does not. There is something comforting in that, something humbling, to know that 1,000 years ago, another human stood beneath the same stars, asking the same questions, feeling the same smallness. They looked up at the night sky and saw the face of God. We look up and see galaxies. But the awe is the same, the loneliness the same, the longing identical. The only difference is the language we use to describe it. In every age, there is a kind of darkness, not evil, but uncertainty. The Middle Ages lived in one that smelled of smoke and incense. Ours hums with electricity and endless noise. Their darkness was made of things they didn't understand. Ours is made of things we understand too well. But the answer has always been the same: to keep the fire alive, to keep asking, building, dreaming, even when the world feels heavy with unknowing. That's the quiet beauty of the medieval story. It isn't a tale of ignorance, but of courage. Imagine believing that every storm was divine anger, that every sickness was a test, that every death was a door to judgment, and still getting out of bed to live, to plant, to pray, to love. Imagine hearing the curfew bell and knowing the night outside was full of danger and still lighting a candle before sleep. That is the essence of humanity, persistence through fear. The scholars and warriors, the nuns and thieves, the kings and peasants, all of them were pieces of the same fragile dream, holding the line between despair and meaning. They built beauty not because they were free, but because they were frightened. Every spire and fresco was an act of defiance, a way of saying, "The dark will not win tonight." And it didn't, because it never does. Each generation carries a small torch through the night, and though the flame flickers, it keeps moving forward. From the monasteries to the observatories, from parchment to printing press, from faith to reason, the light never went out. It only changed hands. You can trace it if you close your eyes. From a monk copying by candlelight, to a sailor steering by starlight, to an artist mixing color in a sunlit studio, to you sitting here, centuries later, reading or listening, feeling that same quiet hum beneath your skin. The chain is unbroken. The fire still burns. And perhaps that's why the Middle Ages still matter, not because of their kings or their conquests, but because they show us who we are when everything falls apart. Strip away the machines, the screens, the endless explanations, and you find the same trembling heart, still asking, why? And still daring to live without a perfect answer. That is the legacy left by the people who feared the night and built cathedrals anyway. The people who obeyed strange laws and still found ways to laugh. The people who buried half their children before winter but kept singing hymns in the cold. They were not defined by darkness. They were defined by light, the fragile, flickering kind that refuses to die. And maybe that's the truest way to understand them, not as the past, but as a mirror. Because someday, when we are gone, our age will be remembered in the same way, full of contradictions, full of wonder and fear. Our rules will seem strange, our customs absurd, our certainties laughable, but someone, centuries from now, will look back and see it the same flame, the same reaching for meaning in the vastness of existence. They will call our time modern, or ancient, or foolish. They will say we lived in the dark, just as we say it of the Middle Ages, and they will be right, in their own way. Every age is dark while you are living in it, because no one can see the light they are carrying forward. That's what makes this story endless. The world turns, the centuries fall away, and still people build, people hope, people fear, and people love. The curfew bell has been replaced by the hum of streetlights, the bathhouses by running water, the trials by fire, by arguments on screens. But the heart beneath it all has not changed. It beats with the same stubborn rhythm, steady, ancient, human. And so, as this long journey through the medieval dream comes to its quiet end, Imagine it once more. The city of stone and smoke, the cold wind of the north, the songs of the Yrian bride, the silence of Greenland's frozen shore, the sword of Harald Hardrada gleaming one last time beneath the Sunday. All of it fading, but not gone. The past does not die. It sleeps beneath our every breath, waiting to be remembered. So let it rest now gently, like a candle's flame bowing to the dawn. The story has been told. The bells have stopped ringing. The long night of the Middle Ages has given way to morning. But somewhere, in the distance between memory and dream, a whisper remains. We were here. We lived. We feared. We built. We believed. And because they did so, do we. And when morning finally comes, it arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet light, the kind that seeps through a fog and settles softly on everything the night tried to hide. The torches have burned down to smoke, the bells have fallen silent, and the people of the new world open their eyes to a gentler kind of uncertainty. The Middle Ages have slipped away, but their heartbeat lingers in the walls, in the language, in the bones of every street. The world they built with all its fear and faith and fumbling hope became the foundation we stand on now. If you listen, truly listen, you can almost hear them breathing beneath your feet. The cobblestones still echo with the rhythm of hooves and footsteps. The churches that survived still hum with the faint vibrations of prayers long finished. The rivers that once carried Viking ships now reflect the glass towers of cities. We've changed the surface, but the current beneath it all is the same, an endless, patient murmur of human life trying to make sense of itself. In this new morning, the people of the world begin again, but they do not start from nothing. They inherit the tools of those who came before, the stories, the symbols, the stubborn belief that there is something worth building. The merchants who once traded spices now trade in data. The monks who once copied books are reborn as programmers, writing new scriptures in lines of code. The explorers who once crossed oceans now send machines into space. And still, at the core of every motion, the same yearning to understand, to endure, to belong. It is easy to think of progress as escape, as if we have left the old world behind. But look closer, and you'll see how it follows us not as shadow, but as structure. The laws that govern us, the rituals we cherish, the art we adore, they all carry the fingerprint of the medieval dream. We still marry with rings, still bless the dead, still build monuments that stretch toward the heavens. We still tell stories of courage and betrayal, of kings and saints, of good and evil. We still whisper to the dark, asking for mercy in 1,000 new dialects. We are modern, yes, but we are also ancient. Because for all our science and reason, we have not cured the oldest disease of all, the ache of being human. We still fear loss, still crave meaning, still stand trembling before the mystery of existence. Our skyscrapers may scrape the clouds, but they rise from the same desire that once built cathedrals. Our algorithms may predict the weather, but they serve the same need to believe that the world can be understood. Our medicine fights death, but it cannot answer why we are so afraid of it. That is the thread that ties us to them, the people of the Middle Ages, who built their world one frightened prayer at a time. They were wrong about much, but right about the most important thing, that life, in all its confusion and terror, is still worth shaping into something sacred. Their courage was not loud. It was quiet, patient, ordinary. A farmer waking before dawn to till frozen soil. A mother whispering a lullaby, even as the plague stole her neighbors. A monk copying the same line for hours, knowing it might be the only thing to survive him. A sailor praying to both Christ and Odin before setting out into a storm. These were not heroes in the way we imagine them, but they were the reason the world endured. And maybe in the end, that's the lesson, that history is not made by kings or crusades or inventions. It's made by the people who refuse to stop living, even when the night feels endless. It's made by the quiet acts of faith that no one writes down. A shared loaf of bread, a hand held in the dark, a song hummed under breath. We are still singing that song. Every generation adds its verse. The melody changes, the instruments evolve, but the rhythm remains the same. Heartbeat, breath, hope. What the Middle Ages began, we continue. The long, imperfect attempt to make sense of the impossible. So as you sit here, surrounded by the hum of your own century screens glowing, clocks ticking, lives rushing past, take a moment to hear what hums beneath it, that faint echo of the past, calling softly, kindly, from the dark. It does not ask for reverence. It does not demand guilt. It only asks to be remembered as it truly was. Not a time of monsters and madness, but a time of people doing their best in the shadow of the unknown. Their rules, their fears, their strange beliefs, they were never about control. They were about love. A love for order, for safety, for something greater than themselves. The bathhouse bans, the curfews, the church bells, all were ways of saying, "We are here together. Let us endure this night as one." And they did. We carry their endurance forward each time we choose kindness over cruelty, curiosity over fear, light over silence. Every time we build something that will outlive us, a book, a bridge, a song, we keep their story alive. The medieval candle still burns in us, even if we've forgotten where the flame came from. So let it burn. Let it remind you that history is not behind you, but beneath you, holding you up, whispering through every heartbeat, "Keep going, we did." And when you close your eyes tonight, somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, you might feel it, the faint vibration of 1,000 years of hope, a monk's chant, a Viking's prayer, a bride's trembling vow, a child's laughter in the cold. All of it still there. All of it still human. And when you wake, you will carry it with you, not as history, but as inheritance. A living flame passed through time, from the frightened heart of the Middle Ages to your own quiet morning. The story has never really ended. It only keeps breathing softly, endlessly, beautifully, just like us. And in that breath, the quiet, invisible thread between then and now, there is something holy. Not in the way the old priests meant it, but in the way a sunrise feels holy after a long night. It is the holiness of survival, of endurance, of carrying the world forward one fragile heartbeat at a time. That's all humanity has ever done. Stumble through darkness, clutching whatever light it can make, and call it faith, or reason, or love. The world that followed the Middle Ages, the world we live in now, is built entirely from that kind of light. The Renaissance, the revolutions, the discoveries of science and philosophy, they were not eruptions of genius, but the slow unfurling of 1,000 unseen hands. The hands of stonemasons who taught architects to dream, the hands of scribes who preserved old words so new ones could be written, the hands of mothers who held their children through famine, their lullabies traveling through centuries to become symphonies. If you strip away the names and dates and monuments, that is what remains. Hands passing light forward. Even today, when we think ourselves distant from superstition, we perform the same ancient ritual we build. We build cities, machines, theories, networks. We build to hold back the void, just as our ancestors built walls and cathedrals. The shape of our defenses has changed, but the reason hasn't. We cannot bear the idea of emptiness, so we fill it with meaning. We write, paint, calculate, pray, and hope that what we make will outlast us. And in that effort, however flawed, however human, we become part of something endless. The Middle Ages were a long conversation between fear and wonder. They began with the collapse of an empire and ended with the birth of curiosity. In between lay the miracle of persistence. Every absurd law, every broken faith, every superstition was a step in the same direction, toward understanding. We laugh at their logic, but we stand on its shoulders. When a medieval farmer looked up at the stars and believed they were angels, he was wrong, but he was also right. He was right to feel awe, right to sense that he was part of something vast. His mistake was scientific, not spiritual. His yearning was the same as ours. Replace angels with atoms, and the feeling doesn't change. Maybe that's the secret history beneath all history, that progress isn't the replacement of old ideas with new ones, but the translation of wonder from one language to another. The monks who illuminated manuscripts in candlelight were doing the same work as the scientists who code light into machines. The sailors who followed constellations were the ancestors of astronauts. The priests who told stories of creation were early storytellers of purpose. They all reached for the same invisible thing: connection. The need to know that we belong to the universe, not apart from it. And when you think about it that way, the Middle Ages never really ended. They're not just a chapter in a book, they're the foundation of every question we still ask. They taught us to search for meaning even when there's no promise of finding it, to sing in the dark because silence is worse, to believe that what we build, even if it crumbles, matters. We inherited their fears, yes, but also their courage. The courage to look at a world ruled by death and still plant flowers. The courage to believe that ignorance could be illuminated, that cruelty could be tempered by compassion, that chaos could be shaped into art. We are their descendants not by blood, but by defiance. And maybe, in the end, that is the truest gift they left us. Not their cathedrals, not their kingdoms, not their relics, but their stubborn refusal to stop creating beauty in the face of despair. They didn't build for comfort, they built for meaning. And that meaning still hums beneath our feet every time we step into a museum, open a book, touch another human being, or whisper a prayer to no one in particular. If there is one lesson left to carry from their long, fumbling night, it is this: that the world is always both broken and beautiful, and the only thing that redeems it is the act of caring enough to build anyway. So maybe, when you wake tomorrow, look around you and see the remnants of their courage. The light through the window that's the same light that once fell through stained glass. The hum of traffic not so different from the clatter of carts on cobblestone. The pulse in your wrist, the same rhythm that beat in 1,000 medieval hearts, fragile and fierce. We are the continuation of their prayer, the living echo of their fear and their hope. And somewhere, if time could fold in on itself, if the veil between centuries could thin for just a heartbeat, you might feel them watching the nameless millions who kept the flame alive before you were born. The monk, the farmer, the child with the wooden toy, the woman who lit the last candle before her house went dark. They are still here, not as ghosts, but as gravity holding you in the orbit of everything they left behind. So, walk gently, speak softly. The ground beneath your feet remembers. And when the day grows long and your heart grows heavy, remember this: you have already inherited all the courage you need. It was made for you by hands that never stop trembling. You are the proof that they did not fail. And as long as you keep their flame alive in whatever small, imperfect way you can, the story will never end. Because history isn't written in ink or stone, it's written in heartbeat and breath. And tonight, as the world sleeps and the stars shine over both the living and the dead, you are part of that same endless dream, the dream that began in the dark and still dares, quietly, to reach for the light. And the light, as it always does, spills forward soft, unhurried, forgiving. It touches everything that remains: the ruins, the books, the bones, the whispered names of those who built the world and never lived to see it whole. It moves through time the way morning mist moves through a forest, brushing past centuries without ever stopping, illuminating what was, what is, and what will be. If you stand still long enough, you can almost feel that light on your skin, ancient and newborn all at once. It carries the dust of every age, every hand that reached toward warmth, every voice that refused to be silent. It carries the songs of builders, the laughter of children who never knew how brief their world would be, the heartbeat of mothers praying over the sick. It carries the echoes of monks copying words they barely understood, of sailors singing to calm the sea, of lovers whispering promises in languages long forgotten. That light has seen everything, and still it moves. It passed through the stained glass of medieval cathedrals, bent over the frozen cliffs of Greenland, shimmered on the armor of kings, glowed on the skin of a Yrian bride as her veil burned away. It followed Hardrada's last breath on the battlefield, and settled softly on the pages of a scholar's notebook centuries later. It survived every plague, every war, every loss, and here it is now, falling across your face as you listen, as you breathe, as you live. The truth is this: we are made of that same light. We are the continuation of everything that came before: the fears, the hopes, the mistakes, the miracles. The Middle Ages weren't a pause between progress. They were a heartbeat in a body still learning how to live. And their pulse still moves through us, steady and sure, a reminder that even when the world feels impossible, it has been endured before. Look around. The modern world hums with 1,000 artificial stars, city lights, screens, satellites tracing paths across the sky. We built our own constellations, and yet we still look upward the same way the ancients did, searching for meaning in patterns, pretending the universe is speaking just to us. The difference between now and then is not wisdom, only vocabulary. We replaced demons with algorithms, replaced miracles with math, but the yearning underneath that aching desire to understand why anything exists at all has never changed. In that way, the medieval soul never died. It adapted. It traded its rosary for reason, its incense for electricity, its hymns for data, but its prayer is the same. Let there be order. Let there be meaning. Let there be light. And maybe that is the final gift of those long, shadowed centuries. They taught us that light is not something given, it's something made. Every torch lit in the dark, every law written to calm fear, every story told to explain the stars. Each was a spark against the void. Alone, they were small. Together, they became civilization. You are one of those sparks. Every time you reach out in kindness, every time you create, every time you seek truth, even when it terrifies you, you are building on the same foundation laid by hands that shaped stone and ink 1,000 years ago. The world changes, but the work never ends. It only passes from one soul to another, like a candle carried through the ages. And that is the quiet secret of history. It is not about endings, it is about continuance. The Middle Ages didn't vanish when the Renaissance began, just as your story won't vanish when tomorrow replaces today. Time doesn't erase, it layers. Beneath your laughter, someone else's laughter still echoes. Beneath your footsteps, 1,000 others still resonate. Beneath your fears, the courage of your ancestors still waits, whispering that you've been through worse before. Because you have just not in this body, not in this century, not with these tools, but the human heart that beats within you is older than empires. It has survived everything. So when the world feels heavy, remember, you are the child of survivors of villagers who buried their dead and kept planting seeds, of travelers who set sail knowing they might never return, of dreamers who painted suns on cave walls before they even knew what the sun was. The blood in your veins remembers what it means to continue. And maybe that's the final truth, that the story of the Middle Ages was never really about darkness at all. It was about endurance. About how humanity learned to keep walking when it couldn't see the path. About how fear and faith, reason and superstition all belong to the same fragile creature trying to find its way home. You are that creature still. And as long as you breathe, as long as you build, question, and love, the old world breathes with you. Its light moves through you, steady as pulse, soft as dawn. It does not fade. It does not rest. It only changes shape. So carry it. Carry it in your words, in your silence, in the way you touch the world, and the world touches you back. Let it remind you that even in the deepest night, you are never truly alone. You are surrounded by the ghosts of all who endured before you, by the echo of their prayers, by the warmth of their courage. Somewhere far in the distance, a bell rings not to command or to warn, but to welcome. The long medieval night is over, but the song it began still plays, quiet and endless, inside the heart of the living world. And if you close your eyes, you can hear it now, not the sound of darkness, but the sound of every light that ever refused to go out. It's faint at first, a shimmer of memory, a vibration somewhere between sound and silence, but it grows the longer you listen. It is the hum of everything that has ever lived and still refuses to die, the music of endurance, the song of humanity. It drifts through centuries like smoke, touching all it passes. You can almost trace its path, from a Viking hammer striking an anvil in the cold dawn to a nun's soft chant inside a candlelit chapel, from the steady rhythm of a peasant's hoe breaking soil to the delicate scratching of a monk's quill across parchment. It crosses oceans on wooden ships and whispers through the hands of artists, sculptors, astronomers, engineers, every soul who ever reached for the impossible and called it work. And as the world changes, as the walls rise higher and the voices grow louder, the song remains the same. It is the pulse beneath progress, the heartbeat under history. Every discovery hums with it. Every act of compassion carries it. Every quiet breath taken in awe of the universe sustains it. the melody of survival, simple and unstoppable. You can hear it now, can't you? Not in words, but in rhythm, that steady beat that lives in you, the same one that lived in them. You share it with the builder of cathedrals, the farmer who prayed for rain, the sailor who followed stars, the child who dreamed of flight. You share it with everyone who has ever whispered to the dark, "Please let there be light." And there always is. That's what the Middle Ages were, a long, trembling note held between darkness and dawn. 1,000 years of people refusing to stop singing, even when their voices shook. They built beauty on top of fear, meaning on top of mystery, civilization on top of chaos. They didn't need certainty to create, they only needed hope. And when their hope burned out, they built new fires. That is the true inheritance they left behind, not their kings or wars, not their cathedrals or crowns, but the unbreakable instinct to kindle flame in the cold, to make something out of nothing, to believe that light can be built by hand. So much of what we are began there, in those small acts of defiance. The printing press that spread words faster than plague, the telescope that dared to look where angels feared to tread. The compass that taught sailors the world was wider than they'd been told. The mapmaker's ink, the scholar's quill, the midwife's steady hands. They all hummed with that same song, faith not in dogma, but in possibility. And though time has changed the instruments, the melody plays on. We sing it now with circuits instead of choirs, with engines instead of harps. We build with glass and steel instead of stone. But the purpose has not changed. We are still reaching for something greater than fear, and every invention, every idea, every act of kindness is another verse in the same ancient hymn. It's easy to forget that. To think progress means escape, that we've outrun the past. But the truth is gentler and more humbling. The past isn't behind us, it is within us. The medieval mind, for all its superstition, lived close to wonder. It saw mystery everywhere, in thunder, in illness, in birth, in love. It feared that mystery, yes, but it also revered it. And in that reverence was wisdom we sometimes lose in our hunger to explain. Because not everything must be solved. Some things are meant to be marveled at. The people of the Middle Ages didn't know how the stars burned, but they looked up anyway. They didn't know how disease spread, but they held the sick anyway. They didn't understand the ocean's depth, but they sailed into it anyway. That is the courage we inherit, to live fully inside the questions, to seek, even when there may be no answer. And perhaps that is the final truth, that the light they left us was never meant to banish the dark completely. It was meant to teach us how to walk within it, unafraid. So when you wake tomorrow, when you step out into the noise of your own century, carry that lesson with you. When fear tightens the air, when uncertainty creeps close, when the world feels too vast or too cruel, remember them. Remember the people who lived when the night was longer than the day, and who still built towers toward heaven. Remember the hands that held the line against oblivion. Remember that you are made of the same defiance. And if you ever doubt it, if you ever feel small, or lost, or powerless, step outside on a quiet night. Look up. The same stars that shone over them shine over you now. The same light that touched their faces touches yours. The same song moves through your chest. You are not alone in this story. You never were. You are the continuation of their prayer, their work, their dream. The living proof that their strange, beautiful, frightened world was not in vain. And long after we are gone, after our cities crumble, our machines go silent, our names are forgotten, the song will go on still. Someone, somewhere, will feel that same ancient rhythm, and they will build again. They will believe again. They will light another fire in the dark. Because that is what humanity does. It remembers. It rebuilds. It begins again. And the light moves forward, eternal, patient, and bright, singing softly, endlessly, through every age. And as that light moves forward, across oceans, across centuries, across everything we've ever been, it becomes more than memory. It becomes motion. It becomes the quiet, steady proof that no act of love, no spark of courage, no whispered dream is ever truly lost. Everything endures somewhere. Every story leaves a trace. It doesn't matter that the names fade. The names always fade. The builders of cathedrals are gone. The monks who sang their psalms are dust. The warriors who thought themselves eternal are only echoes now. But what they made, what they believed in lives through us, in ways they could never have imagined. Their prayers became our philosophies. Their fears became our questions. Their stories became our science. We are walking on the bones of their wonder. Every modern road was once a trail worn by bare feet. Every equation began as a myth. Every invention began as a prayer for survival. The light of today is not a separate thing from the dark of yesterday. It is its transformation. The candle of the Middle Ages became the lamp of the Renaissance, became the bulb, became the screen. The same fire, only carried in a new vessel. You carry it too. You carry it each time you look at the world and think, there must be more than this. You carry it when you refuse to stop asking questions, when you reach for kindness instead of cruelty, when you build something that doesn't have to exist, art, a poem, a gesture, a moment of grace. Those are your cathedrals. That is your defiance. The people of the medieval world did not know their age would be called dark. To them, it was simply life, their one brief chance to make meaning before the silence took them. They didn't see ignorance when they looked at themselves. They saw struggle and faith and a fragile kind of beauty. They believed that even if the world ended tomorrow, it was still worth building something today. And maybe that is what wisdom really is, not knowing the answers, but choosing to live as if the questions are sacred. We think of the Middle Ages as an age of superstition, but perhaps they understood something we have forgotten. That the line between science and prayer, between knowing and believing, is thinner than we think. The astronomer and the monk were not opposites. They were both searching the sky for meaning. The difference was only in language. And when you think about it, when you strip away the centuries of pride and progress, we are still doing the same thing. We call it curiosity. They called it devotion. But both are just love wearing different masks. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? That the world has never really been divided between light and dark, ignorance and knowledge, faith and reason only, between those who reach forward and those who turn away. The Middle Ages were not a mistake in our evolution. They were the pause between breaths, the gathering of strength before the next leap. And the leap, as always, came from the same place: hope. Hope that the next day would be kinder. Hope that the next generation would understand more. Hope that even in a world of plague and fear, someone would remember their name, their song, their love. Hope that the light, however small, would be enough. It was. It still is. The world that once lived by torchlight now glows with 1,000,000 artificial suns. Yet every one of them is still, in essence, a candle, a defiant little flame against the vast, unending dark. We think we have outgrown fear, but perhaps what we've truly learned is how to carry it better, how to let it remind us that we're alive. The people of the Middle Ages taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to build anyway, to believe anyway, to keep walking through the night, even when dawn feels like a myth. And so, even now, as we sit beneath satellites and skyscrapers, surrounded by the noise of a world that believes it has conquered the dark, we are still what they were. Small creatures with fragile hands, holding light. We are still telling stories into the void, still praying though our prayers are written in code and sound waves now. We are still building temples, only ours are made of glass and data instead of stone. But the spirit is the same, the song is the same, the dream is the same. And maybe, when our own age has crumbled into dust, when our machines have gone silent and our cities have turned back to earth, someone will stand where we once stood and feel it too, that same ancient hum, that same pulse of defiance, that same unstoppable hope. They will look up at whatever stars still shine, and they will know, as we know now, as the people of the Middle Ages knew then, that the light never truly belonged to any one time, or any one people. It belongs to all of us, endlessly passed forward, endlessly reborn. That is the true continuity of history. Not kings, not wars, not monuments, but light. A single human impulse, stretching unbroken through time, to build, to believe, to endure. And when you close your eyes tonight, let that light rest in you. Let it remind you that you are part of the same infinite story, the one that began long before you and will continue long after. You are not an ending, you are a verse. And the song goes on gentle, eternal, unafraid into the morning. The morning comes quietly, the way truth always does, without fanfare, without drums, just a slow unveiling of light that makes everything ordinary again. The stars retreat, the cold fades, and the world you thought belonged to another century becomes your own once more. The stories dissolve into silence, but the silence feels different now. It's full, not empty. It hums with all the ghosts of what you've just seen, peasants and knights, monks and sailors, queens and thieves, all turning back into dust, but dust that once dreamed. If you listen closely, you can still hear them. The faint whisper of a prayer beneath the ringing of bells, the laughter of a tavern after curfew, the sound of a hammer against iron, a loom clicking through the night, a page being turned in a candlelit cell. They never really left. They're just quieter now, folded into the rhythm of our modern lives. The hum of your refrigerator is a kind of medieval bell, keeping time. The flicker of your phone screen is a spark of the same fire that once warmed stone hearths. The way you scroll through endless words and faces, it's not so different from wandering through the narrow streets of an old town, trying to find connection, meaning, or maybe just a voice that feels human. History never disappears. It reincarnates. And that's the part we forget when we call the past primitive. Every rule that seemed absurd, every punishment that felt cruel, every ritual that sounds superstitious, they were all ways of trying to survive chaos, trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense. The curfew bell wasn't just control, it was protection. The fasting laws weren't just deprivation, they were preservation. Even the ridiculous sumptuary laws, don't wear purple, don't look too noble, stay in your place. They were desperate attempts to hold together a fragile society built on hierarchy and fear. We can mock them now because we know better, but only because they lived it first. They stumbled through ignorance so we could stand in knowledge. They made mistakes so we could inherit wisdom. And maybe someday, people will look back at us the same way, shaking their heads, laughing at the absurdity of our rules, our customs, our blind spots. Maybe they'll say, "Can you believe they used to work themselves to exhaustion? Can you believe they let machines decide what they thought?" They'll call us medieval too, and they won't be entirely wrong. Because progress isn't a straight line. It's a spiral, looping back through the same fears and hopes, dressed in new clothes. The plagues come back, only smaller and swifter. The kings return, only now they're algorithms. The churches return too, not made of stone, but of screens and followers and digital prayers. The Middle Ages are still here, just hidden under glass and neon. And maybe that's why their stories matter so much, not because they're gone, but because they're us, in an earlier dialect. When we laugh at the man who was fined for wearing silk, we're really laughing at our own obsession with status symbols. When we pity the woman who risked prison for stealing bread, we're seeing the reflection of our own hunger, not for food, but for dignity. When we feel awe for the Viking who crossed icy seas, we're remembering that same reckless fire that pushes us to cross space, to build, to explore, even when reason tells us not to. History isn't behind us. It's beneath us, the floor we stand on, the heartbeat under the noise. So, when you wake tomorrow, carry a little of it with you. The humility of the peasant who worked by candlelight. The stubborn faith of the monk copying books he'd never lived to see finished. The resilience of the Viking woman spinning wool through endless winters. The quiet defiance of those who endured rules they didn't make and kept living anyway. Because that's what history really teaches, not dates or kings or wars, but endurance, the kind that doesn't roar, but whispers, the kind that survives famine, plague, exile, and time itself. The kind that remembers that every age, no matter how dark, still had people who loved, who dreamed, who built. And you, in your bed tonight, with your soft hum of electricity and the gentle buzz of a digital world outside your window, are one of them. Another thread in the same ancient tapestry weaving light through darkness, one breath at a time. So close your eyes. Let the fire burn low. The bells have rung, the candles are out, and the night, that eternal, forgiving night, has taken you back into its arms. The world will wait. The stories will wait. For now, it's enough to rest, to breathe, to listen to the hum of history fading into the soft rhythm of your own heartbeat, because even as you drift towards sleep, you are still part of the oldest rule humanity ever made, the one that says, keep going, keep hoping, keep the fire lit. And when the morning comes again, as it always does, you'll wake not as a spectator of history, but as its continuation carrying in you the courage of the past, the wonder of the present, and the small, steady promise that the light will never go out. And when you wake, when your eyes first open to the soft grey of morning, the world feels quieter somehow, as if the earth itself is taking a breath. The light that touches your room is the same light that once touched the towers of Rouen, the fjords of Norway, the fields outside York. It's older than language, older than memory, older even than the fears that shaped the Middle Ages. Yet it falls gently, as though it knows you need to start again. Outside, the modern world hums its electric symphony cars, wires, distant voices. But beneath it, that older rhythm still beats, low and patient. The sound of tools and hands, of breath and effort, of creation. Humanity has never really stopped building. The materials change, but the longing stays the same. The same drive that made a mason carve angels into stone now makes an engineer carve circuits into silicon. The same dream that made a poet sing to kings now makes a child whisper to the stars through a telescope. And you, standing in that small morning light, are no different from them. You are a maker, a dreamer, a continuation of something that has never once broken, no matter how many times the world has burned. Because that's the real story, not the empires or the inventions, not even the triumphs of reason. The real story is the resilience of meaning, the persistence of wonder, the refusal to surrender awe, even when life seems absurd. The medieval mind lived in a world of symbols because it had to. Every illness was a test, every storm a sign, every victory a message from above. It sounds naive to us, but in their faith there was something wise, a refusal to believe that life was random, that everything, even pain, must have purpose. They built their entire world upon that hope. And though we've replaced their saints with systems and their miracles with mathematics, we still seek the same thing, an order that comforts us, a reason that lets us rest. We dress it differently now. We say physics instead of God. We say luck instead of blessing. But the yearning underneath the need to believe the universe isn't indifferent hasn't changed. It's the same yearning that once sent ships into stormy seas, or monks into silence, or lovers into vows they couldn't possibly keep. And maybe that's what makes history so beautiful. It's not just a record of what we've done, but a reflection of who we've always been. Fragile, frightened, hopeful, builders of order in a world that constantly falls apart. The people of the Middle Ages weren't so different from us. They just spoke to their fears out loud. We hide ours behind logic, but they gave theirs names and faces and lit candles against them. It worked. It worked well enough that we're still here, standing in their aftermath, breathing their inheritance. When the Vikings sailed from Greenland into nothing but ice and myth, they didn't know what waited beyond. They weren't seeking conquest, they were seeking continuity. A new place to carry the fire forward. They built homes in impossible cold, planted crops in thin soil, sang songs to remind themselves they still belonged to the earth. And when their world froze and their voices went quiet, they didn't vanish. They became part of the soil itself. Even now, under that ice, their bones whisper the same message the Middle Ages whisper to us. Try again. And when Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, fell on the field of Stamford Bridge, he didn't just mark the end of an era, he marked the beginning of something else. The sword gave way to the pen. The saga gave way to history. The old gods gave way to memory. His death wasn't defeat, it was transformation. The spirit of the sea, of conquest, of restless hunger, became something quieter but deeper, the human will to reach beyond itself. You are a descendant of that will. Everyone is. Every time you create instead of consume, question instead of obey, love instead of fear, you honor that lineage. You carry the same flame that flickered in the Viking longhouse, the same faith that echoed through a monastery at dawn, the same breath that rose from a plague-stricken city to say, "We will live." And that, maybe, is the most important truth of all. History is not what happened, it's what survived. It's not the kings or the wars or the plagues that define the past, it's the persistence of life after them. The laughter that returned after mourning, the bread baked after famine, the hands that rebuilt after ruin. That's the heartbeat you hear under every page, every ruin, every legend. It's the sound of humanity's refusal to vanish. And tonight, when you lie down again, the world will begin its quiet cycle once more, day into dusk, dusk into night, night into memory. The centuries will press closer, and you'll feel that soft presence of everything that came before. The flicker of candles through the fog of time, the hum of lives once lived, the echo of every rule, every faith, every song that tried to make the world make sense. Don't be afraid of it. It's not haunting you, it's holding you. Because you are the continuation of all of it, the echo and the answer, the child of every fear that chose to hope instead. The world is not made of separate eras. It's made of endless mornings, endlessly inherited. And each one, from the first fire to the first prayer to the first dream of tomorrow, begins the same way quietly, bravely, with one small light daring to believe that it will last until dawn. And it does. Somehow, against all odds, the light always lasts until dawn. It trembles, yes, it falters, bends, weakens in the wind, but it never goes out completely. There is always someone awake to guard it. Someone who refuses to let the dark have the last word. Someone who whispers into the vast silence, just a little longer. That has always been our story, not of victory, but of endurance. The world has ended 1,000 times, and still we rise, again and again, as if repetition itself were a prayer. Every empire falls, every faith fractures, every truth is challenged. But the heartbeat beneath it all never stops. That is what connects us to the people of the Middle Ages, to the Vikings, to the nameless millions who came before us, that shared pulse of persistence. The monks may be gone, but the rhythm of their chanting lives on in the steady hum of the modern world, in the soft repetition of traffic lights, in the mechanical breathing of engines, in the endless looping of code that builds our digital cathedrals. Their world was made of stone and prayer, ours is made of glass and electricity. But the architecture of hope is the same. Both reach upward. Both say, we are still here. And beneath all our progress, beneath the satellites and skyscrapers, beneath the cold gleam of modern reason, there is still that medieval voice inside us, whispering not in fear, but in reverence. A small, sacred awareness that we are fragile creatures in an infinite mystery, that the universe does not belong to us, and yet we belong to it. That wonder, not certainty, is the oldest form of truth. We laugh at their superstitions, but ours are no less strange. We check the stars for mood forecasts. We worship invisible currencies. We chase immortality through data. The old gods wore crowns and robes, ours wear logos and algorithms. The altars have changed, but the devotion is the same. The need is the same. The story is the same. And maybe that's what makes humanity so beautifully tragic, this endless need to create meaning, even where none is guaranteed. To build light, even when the dark always returns. To carve angels from stone, even knowing the rain will wear them down. To sing hymns to a silence that may never answer. To love, even when loss is inevitable. That's what they understood, those medieval souls. That life was not about certainty, it was about ritual, the daily act of choosing hope, again and again, no matter how absurd it seemed. They prayed because it gave the universe shape. They obeyed strange rules because it gave chaos a face. They endured because there was no other choice but to endure. And in that endurance, they created meaning, meaning that outlasted plague, war, and time itself. We are the inheritors of that meaning. Every modern comfort, every quiet moment of safety, every freedom to question all of it built atop their fear, their hunger, their faith. The world you know is not new. It is the flowering of roots buried deep in medieval soil. The books you read trace their lineage back to parchment in cold monasteries. The laws you live by echo the old ones written to hold a frightened world together. Even the stories you tell of heroes and villains, of quests and redemption, are descendants of the tales sung in firelight long before history learned to spell its own name. They built the scaffolding of everything, and we, unknowing, still live within it. Sometimes I imagine that if time could fold in on itself, if you could stand in both now and then, you would see how little has truly changed. You would stand in a modern city and hear the same fears spoken in different tongues. Will I be safe? Will I be loved? Will my work matter? You would see the same hands reaching for the same warmth. You would see the same small fires burning in the dark. It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that the future we're always chasing is really the past learning to breathe again. That progress is not a ladder, but a circle. That civilization doesn't climb, it turns. And so we turn, still, turning through the ages, carrying our candles forward through the fog, learning and forgetting and learning again. The rules change, the faces change, but the rhythm stays the same. Each generation lighting the next, each voice passing the same message in 1,000 new ways. Do not be afraid, you are not alone. The night is long, but the light is longer. Maybe that's the truest legacy of the Middle Ages. Not their wars, not their laws, but their endurance. Their ability to believe, in the heart of plague and famine, that morning would come. That life was worth the waiting. That hope, however foolish, was still sacred. And now, here you are centuries later, listening to their echo in your own quiet room. Their story still alive in your pulse. Their hope still flickering in your chest. You are their victory. The proof that faith not in gods but in humanity was never misplaced. And one day, long after your name has faded, someone else will feel that same light. Someone else will wake to another morning and know, without knowing why, that they are not the first and will not be the last. The light will move forward again, as it always has. Gentle, relentless, eternal. And that light, that eternal, wandering flame doesn't rush. It never has. It drifts through time the way breath drifts through lungs, softly, persistently, without need for applause. It doesn't blaze across history like a conqueror. It seeps, quietly, through the cracks of empires, through the ruins of beliefs, through the small, ordinary acts of living that never make it into books. It moves through you now, even as you read these words. You can't see it, but you can feel it, a faint warmth somewhere beneath your ribs, like the memory of a song you've never quite forgotten. That warmth is older than you, older than the city around you, older than the stones buried beneath its streets. It is the pulse of everyone who has ever lived, still passing forward, still whispering, keep going. We talk about progress as though it were a straight road, lit brightly and smooth. But it's more like a winding path through a forest, one walked by countless feet, each leaving a faint trace for the next to follow. Some took the wrong turn, some lit fires to mark the way, some got lost and became the stories we tell to guide ourselves. And you, walking here now, are simply the next traveller. You may not know it, but you are walking through their footprints, the farmers who measured seasons by stars, the monks who mapped heaven with ink, the healers who mixed herbs with prayer, the Viking explorers who trusted the horizon more than fear. Their courage built the path beneath your feet. Their mistakes softened the ground. Their hope cleared enough of the forest for you to see a little farther ahead. The truth is, none of them ever knew what they were building. They thought they were simply surviving. But survival, repeated often enough, becomes civilization. The way a single heartbeat becomes a lifetime. The way a single candle becomes dawn. And maybe that's why, even after all these centuries, we still crave their stories. We read them not to learn about the past, but to remember how to endure the present. Because if they could survive a world ruled by plague, ignorance, and fear, and still laugh, still build, still dream, then maybe we can survive ours, too. It's strange, isn't it? How comfort can come from people we'll never meet. How the courage of strangers, long dead, can reach across time like a hand through fog. That's what history really is. Not a record, but a touch. It reminds us that we've never been alone in the dark. That someone, somewhere, once felt exactly as we do now, and kept walking anyway. The Middle Ages are proof of that. For all their superstition and suffering, they were a time of incredible endurance. People didn't just live, they insisted on living, They celebrated in plague years. They built cathedrals in famine. They wrote poetry under threat of war. They believed that beauty was not a luxury but a necessity, that to make something beautiful was to defy despair itself. And they were right. Beauty doesn't feed the body, but it feeds the spirit. And the spirit is what keeps the body alive when the world is falling apart. Every fresco, every chant, every carved stone was a small rebellion against oblivion. We are still rebelling in the same way. Every act of kindness, every piece of art, every attempt to understand one another, all of it is light made by human hands. It's easy to forget that. The world now feels so loud, so fast, so fractured. We mistake noise for progress, movement for purpose. But underneath all that static, the same old work continues. We are still building meaning out of the chaos, still shaping the darkness into something that resembles love. When you think of it that way, maybe we are still living in the Middle Ages, not of stone and sword, but of confusion and hope. We are still halfway between what we fear and what we dream, still learning how to see, still learning how to believe. And that's all right, because every age is middle age to something greater, every present just a bridge between past and future. The medieval world thought they were the end of history, just as we do now. But history never ends. It only breathes, pauses, begins again in a new voice. The light never dies. It just changes hands. So when the day feels too heavy, when the world seems cruel, when it feels like nothing you do matters, remember this. Someone once felt the same. Someone once knelt on cold stone, unsure if the sun would rise again, and lit a candle anyway. Someone once buried everyone they loved and still planted seeds for spring. Someone once risked drowning to cross an ocean they didn't understand, just to see what lay beyond the horizon. You are their continuation, their prayer, their proof that hope works. And someday, long after your name has faded, someone else will inherit your light, a spark you didn't even realize you'd passed on. It will guide them through their own darkness, the way the medieval light has guided us through ours. That's how history survives. Not through monuments, but through memory. Not through power, but through persistence. And in that persistence lies something divine, not the divine of angels or kings, but the divine of endurance, of love, of the quiet refusal to give up. That, more than anything else, is what makes humanity sacred. So rest tonight knowing this. The story never ends. The fire never dies. The light you carry small, trembling, imperfect is enough. It has always been enough. Sleep and let the centuries hum beneath your breath. You are safe inside their song. The same song that has carried us from the dark of the Middle Ages to the brightness of now, and will carry us still into whatever dawn comes next. And the dawn that comes next will look different, as it always does. It won't arrive with trumpets or fire, but quietly the way all important things do. It will stretch across the horizon, painting the ruins and the towers and the glass cities in the same light that once warmed the stone walls of medieval abbeys. That light will touch the earth and remind it, again, that life continues, always. It continues. Somewhere, a door opens. Somewhere, a page turns. Somewhere, someone takes a breath and begins again. And though they won't realize it, they're repeating an act as old as history itself, because every beginning is a repetition. Every dawn is a rebirth of the same courage that first learned to strike flint against stone, to make fire where there was none before. You can feel it in the air, that quiet promise, the way morning doesn't rush but unfolds, the way the world waits, holding its breath, before everything starts moving again. It's the same stillness that came after every storm, every plague, every war, the silence before rebuilding, the calm between endings and beginnings. That's the secret the Middle Ages understood better than we do. That progress isn't speed, it's rhythm. It's knowing when to build and when to rest, when to fight and when to heal, when to speak and when to simply listen to the hum of being alive. They filled their silences with prayer, with song, with labor. We fill ours with screens and sound. But the longing underneath is the same, the need to fill the empty spaces with meaning. The fear of quiet, because quiet reminds us how fragile we are. Yet it's in that quiet that everything real begins. If you close your eyes now, you can feel it, the same heartbeat that pulsed in 1,000 years of mornings before yours. The same rhythm that carried monks through dawn prayers, peasants through first harvests, sailors through uncertain tides. It moves through your chest like a tide, steady and soft, and you realize nothing is ever truly gone. Every era lives inside the next. The medieval builder never saw the final spire of the cathedral he spent his life working on, but he built it anyway. The Viking settler never knew if spring would come, but he planted anyway. The Yrian bride, shivering beneath her veil, never knew if love would survive the winter, but she smiled anyway. And now you here, in your own time you breathe, and you carry all of them within you. You are their proof that the light reached this far. You are the continuation of every unfinished story, the living bridge between what was and what will be. That is the real legacy of the Middle Ages, not their kings or their wars, but their patience, their quiet faith that even when everything was uncertain, the world could still be tended like a fragile garden in endless winter. They believed in keeping things alive. Bread, stories, souls, seasons. They believed that care itself was holy. And perhaps that is what we need to remember now. In a world that runs too fast, that confuses noise for purpose and change for progress, we might look back to those slow centuries and see wisdom in their stillness. The world they built lasted not because it was perfect, but because it was cared for. Every stone laid with intention, every candle lit with meaning, every word written with devotion. We have inherited their world. But more than that, we've inherited their responsibility to care, to protect, to build carefully, even when we're afraid. Because someday, someone will inherit what we leave behind. And they will look back at us the way we look back at them. Curious, amused, grateful. They will see our mistakes and our triumphs as one long thread. And they will keep walking, carrying our light forward into their own unknowable night. And maybe that's all history is, not a story of glory or failure, but of stewardship. Each generation holding the flame for a while, then passing it on, trying not to let it go out. So, when you feel small, remember, you are a keeper of fire. You were never meant to conquer the dark, only to outlast it. To keep your small flame alive long enough to light another's. That's what they did in the Middle Ages. That's what you are doing now, whether you realize it or not. And when you close your eyes tonight, as the world falls quiet again, imagine that flame resting between your hands, not burning, not roaring, just glowing, ancient, patient, alive. It has been passed from soul to soul for 1,000 years, through storm and silence, through loss and laughter, and now it rests with you. Keep it safe, keep it warm, because somewhere, someday, someone will need its light to find their way, just as you found yours tonight, walking hand in hand with the past, into the quiet, eternal morning of the human story. And so the flame passes again through time, through silence, through hands that never meet but somehow still find one another. That's the quiet magic of existence. Everything we do echoes beyond what we can see. The medieval mason who carved angels into a cathedral's roof never saw the faces of those who would stand beneath them centuries later. The Viking who sang to the wind as his ship vanished into fog never imagined that his voice would become legend. The nameless woman who lit a candle in fear 1,000 years ago could never have guessed that her act would still glow in us, this simple, ancient motion of refusing the dark. The story of humanity has never been about grand victories. It's about those moments of invisible courage. The tiny, almost forgettable gestures that outlast everything. A word of kindness. A song. A flame. And perhaps that's what all those strange medieval laws were trying to protect. Not power, not control, but the fragile illusion that order could hold the chaos back. Because chaos, even then, was never outside. It was always inside. The bath bans, the sumptuary laws, the curfews, they weren't just social codes. They were prayers. Every rule was a whispered plea. Keep us safe. Keep the world from falling apart again. We mock them because we think we're wiser. But aren't we doing the same? We build our algorithms, our rules, our systems little digital fortresses to keep the chaos out. We pretend the world can be managed if only we code it correctly, map it precisely, name it completely. But life still slips through our fingers. We're still human, still afraid, still hoping. The difference is, they admitted it. They made their fear beautiful, turned it into songs, paintings, stories, cathedrals. They took the worst of the human condition and carved it into something sacred. Maybe that's the lesson we keep missing. Fear doesn't vanish when you deny it. It becomes art when you face it. That's why the Middle Ages, for all their darkness, never truly died, because they were never about ignorance. They were about endurance through uncertainty. They were about finding grace in confusion. That's what we're still learning to do. Think of Harald Hardrada's final moment, the wind screaming across the English fields, his sword glinting one last time in the Sunday. He didn't die a failure. He died as every dreamer dies, chasing something larger than himself. The sagas called him the last Viking, but really he was just another keeper of the flame, a man trying to reach a place beyond fear, beyond reason. That's what all of them were doing, in their own way. The monks, the peasants, the queens, the warriors, all holding light in trembling hands. And you, yes, you are doing the same. When you wake each day and face a world that feels uncertain, you are walking in their footsteps. When you choose kindness over indifference, you are rewriting their prayers in a new language. When you forgive yourself, when you keep going, when you build something small but true that is your cathedral, you may never see its completion, but it will stand. It always does. That's the quiet secret of history. It's not written by kings, but by continuations by those who refuse to let meaning die. So if tonight you find yourself lying in the dark, unsure, restless, listening to the hum of the world and wondering what any of this is for, remember this. Your heartbeat is part of a chain that began long before you and will continue long after. Every breath you take is the next line of a song that began in the first cave, the first prayer, the first fire. You are not alone in this. You never were. Close your eyes. The monks are still singing. The ships are still sailing. The brides are still dancing under pale moons. The kings are still dreaming of peace they will never see. And somewhere, far away, that same single candle still burns in the dark, untouched by time. It waits for you. It always has. The night returns, as it always does, but softer now. The kind of night that doesn't threaten, only listens. The stars hang low and patient, old as every dream ever dreamt, bright as every hope that refused to fade. The world, for a brief moment, forgets its noise. The cities breathe, the oceans rest. Even time itself seems to loosen its grip, as if remembering that it too is human, once. And in that stillness, everything that ever was, the monks, the queens, the sailors, the nameless millions, comes home. The Middle Ages, the Vikings, the forgotten lovers, the unknown poets, they are all here, gathered in the hush of now, not as ghosts, but as warmth, not as echoes, but as rhythm. The same rhythm that has carried us through every fire and famine, every faith and doubt, every ending and beginning. It hums in the pulse beneath your fingertips. It drifts in the breath that fills your chest. You are the continuation of everything. You are the breath after the last hymn fades. You are the heartbeat after the final bell tolls. You are the light that survived the storm. And if you listen closely, you can hear them, the people of the long night, speaking through silence. Their words are not commands, not lessons, only whispers. Rest now, you've done enough. The world will keep turning. The light will find its way. They tell you that the laws that once seemed cruel were born of love, that the fears that shaped them were not foolishness, but tenderness, that even in their ignorance, they were trying, just as you are now, to build something gentle in a world that rarely is. They tell you that the plague ended, that the wars quieted, that the churches grew still, that even after loss, laughter returned. Always laughter returns. Because history, at its heart, is not tragedy. It is renewal. The Viking who watched his world freeze beneath Greenland's ice, he closed his eyes and dreamed of spring. The Yrian bride, wrapped in silken ceremony, whispered her vows, knowing the world would forget her name, but not her love. The monk, copying scripture in the cold, believed that even if his candle went out, the words would live on. And they did. Every one of them lived on, somehow in the lines of our faces, the sound of our voices, the shape of our dreams. They became us. You are their proof. The centuries are not behind you, they are within you, folded like pages in your blood. Every act of kindness you offer, every question you ask, every moment you choose, wonder over cynicism, that is them, speaking again through you. That is history refusing to die. So, let the night hold you the way it held them, tenderly, patiently, with the understanding that even the stars need darkness to be seen. Let the hum of the world become a lullaby. Let the centuries blur until all that remains is light. Breathe in. The scent of the past, smoke, salt, rain, parchment, earth still lingers in the air. Breathe out. Let it all settle. Somewhere, a candle still burns. Somewhere, the tide still touches the old Viking shores. Somewhere, the bells of a forgotten abbey still echo faintly through time. And here, in your quiet room, you are part of it all, the dream of humanity still unfolding, still reaching toward dawn. Sleep now. The monks will keep their vigil. The ships will guard the horizon. The angels carved in stone will watch over your rest. You have walked far through the corridors of time. You have listened to the fears and hopes of the dead. You have carried their light across centuries. Now, it is enough to close your eyes. The world has been tended. The fire has been kept. The story continues without hurry, without end, burning quietly in the heart of everything that breathes. Good night, traveler. The light is safe with you.